So it's common in United Methodist churches to celebrate a few key Sundays that might be unique to the denomination. Sometimes we have themed worship or special offerings or bring in guest preachers. Sundays like Youth Sunday or Peace and Justice Sunday, Scouting Sunday, UMCOR Sunday, some of those might sound familiar. So today is UMW Sunday, United Methodist Women's Sunday. I actually looked for but couldn't find a date for when Methodists began celebrating UMW Sunday. And when I asked around, mostly what I heard was, well, we've just always done it that way. That famous line in a church, we've just always done it that way. We don't know when it started. It was from the very beginning. Why would we do it different? I've learned sometimes change is needed, and other times change for the sake of change doesn't actually serve anyone. And the hard part is knowing the difference. As individuals, as communities, as systems, when do we need to seek change? And when do we recognize what we're doing pretty well? The United Methodist Women began over 100 years ago because a few women, just a few, identified a change that was needed. They didn't mean to start an organization. They didn't even at the time mean to start a movement. They simply meant to help others. United Methodist Women officially began in 1869 with 8 women in Boston. These 8 women had just heard some stories about real needs of women and children in India, and they were distressed. They were concerned. They were moved in a way that led to action. And then their actions led to significant improvements for women and children, not only in India, but around the world since that time. It started because they recognized a need and they were called into action. The UMW has a purpose statement. It's a good purpose statement. It's long. I don't expect you to memorize it. I tried for this and I couldn't do it. It says, United Methodist Women shall be a community of women whose purpose is to know God, to experience freedom as whole persons through Jesus Christ, to develop a creative, supportive fellowship, and to expand concepts of mission through participation in the global ministries of the church. It's a good one. It's hard to get your head around. They have a vision statement, though, that is fantastic. And it's short enough and it's powerful that you could memorize this one. United Methodist Women is turning faith, hope, and love into action on behalf of women, children, and youth in the world. Turning faith, hope, and love into action. And they do this in real ways by partnering with almost 200 organizations in nearly 80 countries around the globe to empower women, children, and youth. They build relationships with ecumenical and grassroots organizations. They focus on issues of health and gender equality, elimination of violence among women, support for uprooted and marginalized people. UMW works to recognize the needs in a community, to respond accordingly, and to work for change. For 150 years, they've been working for peace and healing around the world. And we get to claim them as a part of us, which I just think is fantastic. So if you can't tell, I'm a supporter of UMW. I was raised in a Methodist church. I was the little kid that went with their mom to the UMW meetings, and I grew up hearing the stories of UMW, not only at the local levels, but especially at the global levels as well. And so I think it's good for us to be reminded of this history and the work currently being done. Because I think it speaks to us. And I think it speaks to something more than just the history. UMW Sunday isn't just a time to be reminded of the work that they've done, the work that they're doing. It's a time to ask the question, how are we also participating in this kind of work ourselves? As individuals, as a community of faith, how are we working to bring about change for the good? At the local level, at the broader level, at the global level, how are we responding to real needs, physical, spiritual, emotional needs of people in our world? How are we joining in a community to make a difference, to make a change? St. Luke's has a number of examples that I could list, including our Guatemala trips, the water filters that we're raising money for, the food that we're raising money for homeless veterans. How are we all joining together, not just once, but ongoing? So when I read the vision statement this week, turning faith, hope, and love into action, I was reminded of the scripture that Betty read from the first letter to John. I want to read it again. It says this: "This is how we know love. Jesus laid down his life so that we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. But if a person has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, and that person doesn't care, how can the love of God remain in him or her? Little children, let's not love with our words or speech, but with action and truth." Let's not love with our words or speech, but with action and truth. The writer of this letter doesn't mince words here. He goes straight to the core of his message. If we claim love for Jesus, then we have to respond to the needs of others. If we care for others, then we give from our abundance so that others might have when they're in need. We pay attention to the world and we engage in it by trying to make it better. He had a very simple message which he summed up in one verse. Let's not love with words or speech, but with action and truth. And over 150 years ago, that small number of women did just that. And that work, that movement grew in a way that they probably never imagined it was going to end up. And it's one of the great things about communities. When we come together to do something, it takes on a life of its own. Communities help us connect with something bigger, something beyond what one person alone can achieve. In community, we get to affect change on a bigger scale. And it starts when we come together in love. I'll tell you a story about a mission trip I led once, more than 10 years ago. It was a trip to San Francisco, and we took about 30 youth by train. I won't ever do that again. From Denver to San Francisco, I'll tell you, we were 36 hours delayed getting there. Thank you. That's about how I felt. We went and worked and stayed in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, which at the time was, maybe still is, the most crime-ridden and poverty-stricken district in the city. We didn't rent vans or vehicles. We did public transportation all around San Francisco. I see a couple people cringing. It's about right. I didn't know San Francisco. We did all this with the maps, real maps, not on our phone, too. 40 of us did everything public transportation. You want to get to know the people of a city, take public transportation. This is a group from Arvada. So we were a group of suburban kids and adults spending a week in inner city San Francisco. It was quite an experience. And we partnered with a number of nonprofit agencies while we were there, but the most meaningful experience for me came from a training session at the St. Anthony Foundation. It wasn't a training session I was looking forward to. We all got there, we wanted to get going, we wanted to start, and we had to sit for an hour-long training session in this room that had no windows. We thought it was going to be horrible, but it turned out to actually be life-changing. It's changed how I interact with people. Before we could do any work, any interaction with the clients, we went through this training. And the staff person who led us through the orientation was very clear about what our mission was. It wasn't about the work that we were doing. It was about the relationship we were offering. And when it came time to serve the meal, we were split up into about half. Half the group went to the kitchen to serve the meal, and half of the group was split up then into pairs and groups of 3, and we were told to go wait in line with the people waiting in line for food. Go stand in line with the clients and walk through the line and walk through the food line and sit and share a meal with those who were there for food. We listened to stories, we had conversation, we laughed. This half of us that got to be in line with the folks had a much more meaningful experience than those who served food from behind a counter barely talking with anyone. And it all goes back to that orientation. During the orientation, the staff person very clearly said that the most important part of our work, the most significant thing that we could do, was to look someone in the eye for the week that we were there. Make eye contact. Because in that connection, in that simple act of making eye contact, we were acknowledging their humanness. And for people living on the streets or in shelters, their humanness is often overlooked. So if we did nothing else for the week in San Francisco, make eye contact and make a connection. And I'll never forget that. The idea that simply looking someone in the eye can be so powerful. I found it very true that week, and I have found it true ever since. And I have to remind myself of it on a regular basis. How many of us on our daily drives or other times in the car pull up to an intersection with a person standing with their sign asking for money or food or whatever you can give? How easy is it to not look at them? I watch drivers at intersections, and the vast majority do whatever they can to acknowledge the person's presence. Avoid making eye contact. It's uncomfortable sometimes. Sometimes you worry that if you make eye contact, the person will come to the car when you don't have anything to give. There's lots of reasons that we fail to acknowledge people. It's really easy to do that. Too easy. Too easy to avert our eyes, to avoid people, to turn our bodies, to look past someone. But I'll tell you, in the 10 years since this training that I have come to intersections, I simply do eye contact and a nod, and never once has someone come to the car thinking I was going to give them more. But the nod and the smile I get back is an experience in and of itself. It's easy to avoid, but it's powerful to connect. Sometimes we even pretend that the systems and structures are all working fine and there's nothing we need to do. It's too easy to ignore. It's too easy not to see the people who are right in front of us. And the scripture says, let's not love with words or speech, but with actions and truth. Because it isn't just about failing to see people on the street corners or at the intersections. It's also failing to see the people that are everyday part of our lives. Failing to notice the humanity of the person who hands us coffee, or the cashier at the grocery store, or the driver in front of us who's going slower or driving differently than I would like. It's really easy to see a car and forget there's a person in there. How many people do we cross paths with on a regular day and we don't even notice that they're there, let alone make eye contact with them? So how many chances do we miss to respond? How many opportunities have we let go by? Those 8 women in 1869 noticed what was right in front of them, and they responded. It's amazing when you look someone in the eye. When you look them in the eye, it's nearly impossible not to see them. Even if it's only for a moment, that moment offers a recognition of their humanity and our own humanity as well. It's a moment when divine connection is possible, even if it only lasts for a second or two. It can be a life-changing moment for someone. It can be a life-changing moment for us. It can be a change that leads whole communities to do something new. It can start with an individual and grow. So this week, I encourage you to open your eyes in a new way, to make eye contact with people around you, the people on the street corner, the people you walk past, the people you normally wouldn't even notice. Take a minute and make eye contact and look for the divine within them. Pay attention to what you see. And pay attention to how you can respond. This week, what might happen if we loved with action and truth in a whole new way? Amen.